For 3,000 years, harvesting hay was a biological limit. A man with a scythe cuts 1 acre a day. A crew with pitchforks loads 2 tons an hour. The limits were human muscle and human bone. The 1930s brought a mechanical solution. The stationary baler became the mobile square baler. The machine picked up the hay. It compressed the stalks, it tied the twine. It dropped a block in the dirt. The blocks weighed 60 pounds. Sometimes they weighed 75 pounds. The machine did not load them. Farmers had to lift them. They walked behind flatbed wagons in 100-degree heat. They grabbed the twine. They swung the block up to their waist. They threw it to a man on the wagon. They repeated this motion 100 times an hour. They lifted thousands of blocks a day. The human spine broke down. Shoulders tore. Knees gave out. Finding laborers became impossible. In 1871, a farmer named Gary Vermeer grew tired of the complaints. He walked onto a concrete floor in Pella, Iowa. He picked up a piece of chalk. He drew a massive circle. He erased 3,000 years of sweat. Gary Vermeer was born in 1918. Pella was a Dutch farming community. The soil was deep. The work was endless. He farmed 120 acres. He planted corn. He raised cattle. He did not like unnecessary effort. He watched men waste energy on brute tasks. In 1947, he watched a harvest crew unload a grain wagon. It required a scoop shovel. It took 30 minutes of throwing grain over a high wooden side panel. It exhausted the crew. Gary bought a hydraulic cylinder. He went to his shop. He built a mechanical hoist. He mounted it under the wagon box. He pulled a lever. The wagon tilted backward. Gravity did the work. The grain flowed out in 45 seconds. Neighbors saw the hoist. They asked for one. He built 5. They sold immediately. He built 50. They sold before the paint dried. In 1948, he partnered with his cousin. They founded Vermeer Manufacturing Company. They had 1 employee. They operated out of a small machine shop. The growth was absolute. Sales in 1948 reached $25,000. Sales in 1949 hit $75,000. Sales in 1950 passed $150,000. Vermeer did not stop at wagon hoists. He looked for tasks that broke men's backs. He watched crews dig utility trenches with spades. He built a mechanical trencher. It attached to a tractor PTO shaft. It cut dirt at 10 feet per minute. The company expanded. They hired 50 men, then 100 men. The factory footprint multiplied. They built massive stump cutters. They built tree spades that could rip a 50-foot oak from the earth. The machines were heavy. They required thick steel. Gary remained a farmer. He kept his cattle. He ran his acreage. He wore plain work shirts. He walked the factory floor daily. He listened to the lathes. He watched the welders. He understood torque. He understood hydraulics. He understood weight. By 1970, Vermeer Manufacturing was a serious industrial firm. The workforce numbered in the hundreds. Summer in Iowa is punishing. The humidity sits at 80%. The ambient temperature hits 95 degrees. This is hay season. Cows eat 30 pounds of hay a day in winter. A herd of 100 cows consumes 3,000 pounds of hay a day. That requires 50 square bales. Every single day, for 5 months of frozen ground, a farmer needs 7,500 square bales to survive a winter. Someone has to make them in July. Someone has to lift 7,500 blocks of compressed alfalfa. They lift them onto the wagon, they stack them in the barn loft, they pull them out again in January. In the summer of 1971, Gary Vermeer stood on a street corner in downtown Pella. A local cattleman approached him. His name was Arnold Van Zee. Arnold looked tired. He told Gary he was done. He could not find high school kids to throw hay bales. The work was too brutal. The kids quit after 2 days. Arnold said he had no choice. He was going to sell his herd. Gary listened. He did not say much. He walked away. The problem nested in his mind. The square baler system required a 5-man crew. 1 man drove the tractor. 2 men walked behind the wagon lifting bales from the dirt. 2 men stood in the suffocating heat of the haymow stacking the blocks. 5 heartbeats. 5 spines. Gary asked a structural question. Why do they have to be square? A square is a building block. A human hand can grasp the twine. A human back can lift the 60 pounds. A square bale is designed explicitly for human muscle. Gary wanted to eliminate the muscle entirely. He wanted to design a shape for a machine. A machine does not care about 90-degree corners. A machine spins. He walked into his factory. He found Arnie Mathis. Mathis was a lead company engineer. Gary explained the concept. They needed to make a bale so big a man could never move it. a bale that weighed a ton, a bale only a tractor could lift. Gary bent down, he pressed a piece of chalk to the factory concrete, he drew a circle. It was 6 feet across, it was 18 feet in circumference. Math stared at the chalk outline. A bale that size would weigh 2,000 pounds. It would replace 33 square bales at once. It would require 1 tractor operator, 0 men on the ground, 0 men in the barn loft. The concept was pure. The mechanics were unproven. Nobody had ever rolled hay like a carpet. Hay is organic. It is unpredictable. It has moisture variations. It has long stems and short leaves. It clumps, it clogs steel mechanisms, it tears. They started building immediately. They used steel compression rollers. They used wide rubber belts. They built a massive internal chamber. The belts had to grip the loose hay. They had to spin it into a core. They had to maintain extreme tension as the roll grew from a tight center to a massive 6-foot cylinder. The geometry was violent. They took the first prototype to a field outside Pella. It was a crude box of raw steel. It looked like a grain bin mounted on wheels. Gary drove the tractor. He engaged the 540 revolutions per minute PTO. The machine swallowed the hay windrow. The rubber belts whined. The steel chassis vibrated, the hay stopped spinning, it piled up inside the throat. The machine choked, they shut down the tractor, they climbed out, they pulled the compacted hay out by hand, they adjusted the belt tension, they tried again. It choked again. The rubber belts lacked the required friction, the hay core would not tumble over itself, it just slid. A rolling mechanism requires a starting point. Without a core, there is no roll. They dragged the prototype back to the shop. They welded cleats onto the rollers. They changed the belt routing. They tested it. They failed. They tested it again. The Iowa summer dragged on. Arnold Van Zee was preparing to sell his cows. The 60-pound blocks were still breaking the backs of American farmers. Gary Vermeer looked at the mass of steel belts and rollers. He needed the hay to grip. They needed a core. They needed mass to start the roll. Gary Vermeer and Arnie Mathis stood in the shop. They looked at the empty chamber. They picked up a wooden fence post. They threw it into the throat of the baler. They engaged the PTO. The rubber belts grabbed the wood. The rough bark provided friction. The post spun. They fed a windrow of alfalfa into the pickup teeth. The hay hit the spinning post. It wrapped, the belts tightened, the diameter grew. The machine vibrated, the rear gate strained under the internal pressure. Gary pulled the hydraulic lever, the tailgate lifted, a 500-pound cylinder of tightly wrapped hay rolled onto the concrete floor. It held its shape. They had the sequence. The wooden post was not practical for production. They designed a heavy steel starting roller. They gave it aggressive teeth. They positioned it at the base of the chamber. They hauled the modified prototype back to the field. It was late August. The alfalfa was dry. Gary drove a tractor. He aligned the baler with the windrow. He engaged the clutch. The pickup teeth swept the ground. The hay vanished into the chamber. The belts spun. The tension arms lifted. The bale grew inside the steel walls. At 6 feet in diameter, the indicator triggered. Gary stopped the tractor. He wrapped twine around the spinning cylinder. He pulled the hydraulic valve. The tailgate opened. A 2,000-pound cylinder of hay dropped onto the stubble. It stood 6 feet tall. It was 5 feet wide. Gary pulled the tractor forward. The tailgate slammed shut. He moved to the next windrow. He did not touch a 60-pound block. He did not sweat. He did not need a 4-man crew. He did it alone. A farmer stayed in the cab. The air conditioning ran. The AM radio played. He monitored a mechanical dial. He pulled a hydraulic lever. A 1-ton object rolled onto the earth. The blistered hands healed. A demonstration is the sale. The sale is the demonstration. Word spread across Marion County. Farmers drove their pickup trucks to the edge of Gary's field. They parked on the gravel shoulder. They leaned on barbed wire fences. They watched one man do the work of 5. They saw the massive cylinders dotting the landscape. The design solved 2 problems simultaneously. It eliminated manual labor. It also eliminated indoor storage. A square bale absorbs water. Rain ruins it. Mold consumes it. It must be stacked inside a barn. A barn costs $15,000. A barn requires maintenance. A barn limits herd size to the physical volume of the loft. A round bale acts like a thatched roof. The outer 2 inches of hay form a tight, water-resistant crust. Rain sheds off the curved surface. Snow blows off the top. A farmer could leave 500 round bales sitting in an open field all winter. The core remained perfectly dry, the storage capacity became infinite. The barn was obsolete. Vermeer manufacturing moved immediately. They finalized the design in the winter of 1971. They named it the Vermeer 605. The number 6 feet stood for the 6-foot diameter. The number 5 feet stood for the 5-foot width. They painted it yellow. They priced it at $3,950. In today's money, that is over $30,000. They released the 605 in 1972. Production began in the Pella factory. Sales in 1972 were steady. Farmers were skeptical of the massive shape. In 1973, the hesitation broke. Orders flooded the factory. The telephone lines in Pella jammed. Dealerships across the Midwest demand inventory. Sales in 1972, 300 units. In 1973, 1,500 units. By 1974, 4,000 units. By 1974, the factory ran double shifts. Welders worked 60-hour weeks. They ordered steel plate by the trainload. They purchased rubber belting by the mile. A single baler required 6 individual belts. Each belt was 40 feet long. They traveled at 600 feet per minute. They had to withstand rocks, branches, and uneven windrows. Vermeer Manufacturing transformed from a regional industrial company into an agricultural powerhouse. Arnold Van Zee did not sell his cattle. He bought a Vermeer 605. He baled his own hay. The agricultural establishment watched the explosion. They saw millions of dollars flowing to a family-owned operation in Iowa. John Deere, Heston, and New Holland dominated the hay equipment market. They sold the square balers. They sold the wagons. They controlled the distribution networks. Vermeer threatened their entire hay implement division. Gary Vermeer filed patents. He protected the belt routing system. He protected the core starting mechanism. He protected the tensioning geometry. The major corporations ignored the patents. In 1974, competitive round balers appeared on the market. They were painted green. They were painted red. They featured rubber belts. They featured steel compression rollers. They produced 2,000-pound cylindrical bales. They copied the belts. They copied the tensioners. They copied the rear gate. Vermeer executives met in Pella. The threat was existential. A corporation with a $2 billion market capitalization can manufacture machines cheaper. They can distribute them faster. They can undercut the pioneer. They do not need to invent. They only need to replicate. Gary Vermeer authorized federal lawsuits. He sued the largest agricultural manufacturers on earth for patent infringement. The legal strategy of the conglomerates was attrition, delay the proceedings, inundate the plaintiff with paperwork, drain their cash reserves. Vermeer paid $1.5 million in legal fees in a single year. Corporate lawyers flew to Iowa. They demanded factory blueprints. They deposed engineers. They argued the rolling of hay was an unpatentable concept. They argued the design was obvious prior art. The court cases stretched for years. The legal bills compounded. The pressure on the family business was immense. Every month spent in court was a month the competitors captured market share. In 1976, a federal judge ruled the patents held, the design was entirely novel, the competitors were infringing. The major corporations faced federal injunctions. They halted their legal assaults. They settled. They agreed to pay royalties to Vermeer Manufacturing for every round baler they produced. The exact figures were sealed. Millions of dollars flowed back to Pella. A fraction of every green and red baler sold financed the yellow factory in Iowa. The lawsuit saved the company. It did not stop the competitors. The giants paid the royalties and flooded the market. Round balers replaced square balers globally. By 1980, 80% of American beef cattle were fed with round bales. The 60-pound square block became a niche product for horse owners. Vermeer lost the monopoly. They kept the factory. They continued to build the 605 series. They refined the design. They added automatic tying mechanisms. They added hydraulic tensioning. The machines grew heavier. A 1972 model weighed 2,400 pounds. A 1985 model weighed 4,200 pounds. The tractor horsepower requirements increased from 45 HP to 75 HP. Gary Vermeer watched the evolution. He still owned his farm. He still checked his cattle. The industry shifted beneath him. In the 1980s, the American farm crisis hit. Interest rates reached 21%. Land values collapsed. Farmers defaulted on loans. Tractor sales plummeted. International Harvester broke apart. Alice Chalmers filed for bankruptcy in 1985. The Milwaukee plant closed. 12,000 workers lost their jobs. White farm equipment liquidated. The agricultural landscape was littered with dead brands. Massive corporate conglomerates bought the shattered pieces. They closed factories in the Midwest. They moved production overseas. They laid off thousands of union workers. Vermeer did not lay off its workforce. They did not file for bankruptcy. They survived the farm crisis through diversification. The round baler generated cash. The industrial division absorbed the agricultural losses. They built track trenchers. They built directional drills. They laid the fiber optic cables for the expanding telecommunications industry. The yellow balers financed the orange drills. Gary Vermeer refused all buyout offers. Wall Street private equity firms called. Multinational conglomerates made bids. The answer was always identical. The company was not for sale. The Vermeer family retained 100% of the voting shares. The factory remained in Pella. The machine built the bale. The bale built the company. In 1989, Gary Vermeer stepped down as CEO. He handed operations to his son, Bob Vermeer, and his daughter, Mary Vermeer, fused outside capital. They granted no board seats to private equity firms. The global agricultural market consolidated. In 1999, Case Corporation merged with New Holland. They formed C&H Global. In 1990, AGCO formed to absorb Dietz Alles. AGCO systematically acquired Massey Ferguson. They acquired Heston. They acquired White. The legacy brands lost their autonomy. The factories closed. The production shifted to global supply chains. Vermeer stood alone in Pella. Annual revenue exceeds $1 billion. You cannot buy a share of Vermeer stock. Gary Vermeer kept his office. He kept his 120-acre farm. He drove his pickup truck to the plant every morning. He walked the concrete floors. He talked to the welders. He checked the tolerances on the steel rollers. He watched his invention change. The original 605 baler used heavy mechanical springs for belt tension. The belt snapped under extreme stress. The operators carried splicing tools in the tractor cab. Modern balers replaced the springs with hydraulic cylinders. The tension became dynamic. The bales became denser. They replaced sisal twine with plastic net wrap. Twine takes 30 seconds to tie. It rotates the bale 20 times. Net wrap covers the flat edge of the bale. It sheds water instantly. It takes 3 seconds to apply. 2 rotations of the bale. The tractor stops for 5 seconds instead of 30. Across 1,000 bales, the fuel savings are massive. A modern Vermeer 604 Pro weighs 8,600 pounds, 3,900 kilograms. It requires a 100 GP tractor. A microchip monitors internal moisture, loads cells, weigh the bale inside the steel chamber. The operator watches a digital monitor. One man in an air-conditioned cab processes 40 tons of hay per hour. The physical exertion is zero. The scale of the invention is visible from the sky. The United States supports 28 million beef cows. A cow requires 30 pounds of forage daily in winter. That equals 125 million tons of harvested hay annually. The vast majority of that tonnage is stored in 2,000-pound cylinders. The flat fields of the Midwest, the rolling hills of the South, and the high plains of the West are covered in giant geometric shapes. The chalk circle drawn in 1871 redesigned the American landscape. Gary Vermeer died in 2009. He was 90 years old. He held 27 individual patents. He left behind a 1.5 million square foot manufacturing campus. He left behind 3,000 employees. He never moved the headquarters from his hometown. In 2015, leadership transitioned again. Jason Andringa became CEO. He is Gary Vermeer's grandson. The third generation took control of the manufacturing floor. This is a statistical anomaly. In the United States, 12% of family businesses survive to the third generation. Only 3% survive to the fourth. Heavy manufacturing is brutal. The capital requirements are massive. The supply chain risks are global. Family-owned tractor and implement companies are massive. The Steiger brothers sold. The Versatile founders sold. John Deere builds round balers. New Holland builds round balers. Kubota builds round balers. Vermeer competes against multinational conglomerates every single day. They hold their market share. They rely on the independent dealer network. They rely on the yellow paint. Vermeer survives by maintaining dual lines. The agricultural equipment sustains the rural dealerships. The industrial equipment feeds the corporate balance sheet. They build horizontal directional drills. They build tub grinders weighing 90,000 pounds. They build trenchers that cut through solid limestone. The engineering DNA is identical across all divisions. Find a massive physical obstacle. Apply extreme hydraulic force. Replace manual labor with diesel horsepower. The pellet factory runs 3 shifts. The workforce exceeds 4,000 people. They cut the steel plate. They machine the drive shafts. They weld the baler frames. They assemble the hydraulic valve banks. They paint the chassis yellow. They ship them globally. The original 605 prototype sits in a museum on the factory campus. The steel is crude. The belts are narrow. The frame is welded together with angle iron. It looks like a rough draft. It is the physical manifestation of one farmer refusing to accept biological limits. Arnold Van Zee did not have to sell his herd. Thousands of farm kids avoided spinal injuries. The transition was absolute. The square bale represented the limit of human endurance. The round bale represents the limit of mechanical torque. 3,000 years of broken spines and human limits did not end in a corporate boardroom. It ended on a factory floor in Iowa with a single piece of chalk. If you found this documentary valuable, please like the video and subscribe to the channel.